Judy, when you first heard that Kevin was going to hike the Mormon Battalion Trail, what did you think?
My first thought was, why in the world would anybody want to do that? And then you were dragging poor Denny along with you.
Today I'm going to be doing one of the first podcasts that I'm actually going to be sharing my experiences with people. And one of the main questions people ask me is, why did you go? For those of you who are have been listening to the podcast, this will be the first one that has video. So if you go to the Battalion Trek YouTube channel, you'll be able to see this presentation with the pictures. Well, why did I go? That is the big question. And when most people ask me that, I just immediately say, well, why wouldn't I want to go? And yet I know they want a more detailed answer than that. And so as I've thought about that, I've tried to pull together my thoughts and my experiences throughout my life that I think led to that attitude. All along the trails throughout the country, you might see some of these statues of women. They're called the Madonna of the Trail statues. These are special statues to me because I feel like I have an affinity more with these women than I did previously. Not that I had anything close to the experiences they did in terms of struggles and trials, but I feel like I have a tiny bit of appreciation more of what their lives were like on the trail. You'll see that this woman has a baby in her arm and a little toddler pulling at her skirts or her apron, and she's packing a gun. She's got big army boots on. I walked in tennis shoes in a dress that my girlfriend had made me because I realized just before we left that I hadn't had time to make myself clothes. I was so focused on getting Kevin ready. I had a bonnet. The bonnets are so miserably hot. They protect you from the sun, but they also make you really hot when you're out in the sun as well. I did not have children to contend with, although many of the people that hiked with us did, and so I was able to observe how they handled that situation, trying to encourage them. I didn't have to pack I just feel like I've had some little small taste of what they experienced, and I honor them. And whatever I do in this podcast in terms of sharing my experience as a woman, I hope it will not ever detract from the legacy and the heritage that these women left for all of us. Well, just a little bit about me. I'm going to take you a walk down memory lane because this is why I hiked. Quite frankly, the more I thought about it, these are the things that happened to me throughout my life that made me so anxious to go. So I was born in Salt Lake City, raised there. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I've always loved pioneer things. I just have loved the stories, the clothes, everything about it. And I know it's a romanticized version, but nonetheless, I have always enjoyed pioneer stories and times. This little picture of this little cast iron stove reminds me of the stove that was in my great-grandpa's house when I was growing up. And I love to cook in a Dutch oven. So that's just a little bit about me. When I was about 8 or 9, my dad was involved with Scouts, and he had the boys in our yard in our driveway packing everything up to go to San Diego for a deep sea fishing trip. And of course, I wanted to go, and of course, I couldn't. And so when they drove out of the driveway, I stood there, and I can just remember like this happened an hour ago, saying, "Boys have all the fun. It's not fair. They get to go and do all the fun things." And that was pretty much my attitude for many years until I got to be a teenager. Then you started learning your family history. You know, your grandma and grandpa start talking and you hear things. And I heard that I had some ancestors from Norway who came over to America, and they had 5 little kids, and the parents died and left these children to be farmed out with other families. And that was my great-great-grandpa. Well, my great-great-grandpa had a sister named Ellen Sanders, and she and my grandpa and her other sister eventually bumped into the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, were baptized, went to Nauvoo, and Ellen, his sister, married Heber C. Kimball. Well, come to find out, Ellen was one of the first 3 women that got to go into the Salt Lake Valley. She was chosen to go with Brigham Young's Vanguard Company in 1847. So that was really fun for me to get to know. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to figure out how they figured out she was the one of his wives that got to go. Then when I was in college, I was able to attend one of the very first, I believe, women's conferences that the church held prior to their semi-annual general conferences. Every year we have 2 general conferences where the prophet and the apostles speak to us. And that year they had decided to have a special session of conference just for the women of the church and the Relief Society organization. And I attended, and the talk that was given by President Spencer W. Kimball really touched my heart. It was about the privileges and the responsibilities of sisters and daughters of God. Well, one of the quotes he said was, "Each of you should be grateful to be a woman." And as you know, that was not my attitude prior, since my deep sea fishing experience with my dad and scouts. But when I left that meeting, my whole attitude had changed. Later on in college, they have a program there called the Handcart Treks. And I met my husband, Kevin. He was working for that program as a PAW. They'd have PAWs and MAWs that would help groups of youth down the trails and give them a pioneer experience. This was the year that he was PAW on the Pioneer Trek at Brigham Young University. Well, at the end of the summer, Kevin invited me to go to a reunion that they were having with all of their MAWs and PAWs and the people that had worked up in the mountains. And I realized as they were all chatting away about all these memories and laughing and having a good time, that I was not a part of it. I felt very left out and out of place because they had this experience between them and I was not part of it. And it was uncomfortable for me. And I realized that was something I couldn't share with Kevin just because I hadn't been there. Just a few months after we were married, Brigham Young University called Kevin and asked him if he would be the director of the Pioneer Trek program. And that, at that point, I was welcomed into the fold and we were all in. We were bound at the hip for the next year, planning, preparing, training, scouting, out trails. Everything we did was together and it was all about the pioneer experience. And that changed our relationship and my experience whenever Kevin talked about Pioneer Trek. I was there and I was involved. In 1980 is the year that Kevin directed the trek and we had a marvelous experience. I was actually expecting our first baby and people were so kind to me. I was up in the mountains as much as I could. Of course, I wasn't walking and pulling hand carts, but I was experiencing things with the group and had the memories that Kevin did as well. One of the staff members was just so cute. He carved a little wooden spoon that had a rattle in it for the baby, and another person painted this cute little Pioneer Trek scene on a piece of slate for us, and these are things that we cherish to this day. Well, at the very end of the summer, I delivered Christopher, and he was blessed in the mountains in our church. We give babies blessings or christenings, so to speak. And we were able to go up in the mountains on one of the last Pioneer Treks to give Chris a name and a blessing with our friends and family, which was a very special experience as well. Well, we graduated finally, and Kevin got a job down in Pima, Arizona. And as we were looking for a place to live, we found a place that had a hand cart in the front yard. And boy, that was that sealed the deal. We knew that was where we were supposed to live. And we had so many wonderful memories in Pima. But interestingly enough, this is one of the places that the miracles began to happen for our 2008-2009 trek. This was in 1980 and 1981. So way back then, the Lord was preparing us to be able to do the hike along the trail, and I'll tell you about that later. Now, I was not one of the women that stayed home. I was able to go with Kevin, and yet there were times definitely on the trek that I had the stay-at-home experience. I know those women were hoping and praying the same thing that I was, bring him home to me safely. There were times when Kevin would head off in places like this, or where there were fences and mountains and canyons that the vehicles just could not get through. And we didn't have permission to go through with vehicles. And I would have to send him off, and I would have to hope that he would be there at the rendezvous point at the end of the day. And I cannot tell you how grateful I was when I heard that radio start to crackle and hear his voice. And it was at those times that I definitely felt like I could empathize with those women who were at home waiting for their husbands to hear of him, hear of them, and to know that they were safe. Well, the other experience I'd had in my life being left behind was after Kevin graduated from college and got his RT degree for radiology or X-ray. He got hired by Phonar Corporation in Long Island to go and be an applications specialist, where he would travel around the world and train MRI technologists and doctors of how to use their machines once they were installed. But anyway, from my perspective, he was eating out at restaurants and having a grand time. I was at home holding down the fort, so to speak. Well, he was gone so much that if we got to see him every 3 or 4 weeks, that was really good. And John, our youngest son, he was about 2 or 3. And when people would ask him where his dad was, he would point up in the sky. And people thought that Kevin had died. But John's life with his dad involved going to and from the Orlando airport. So he always thought his dad was up in the sky in an airplane. The other thing was when I know there were many women who gave birth to children without their husbands. And that was kind of the same situation with me. With Chris, I wasn't sure Kevin was going to be able to make it home from the mountains. Of course, you don't ever know when a baby's going to come. And the same thing happened with Catherine. He was up in the mountains when she was born, and it took me 2 layers of forest rangers to get the word to him to come down off of Mount Graham in Arizona. He did make it to the hospital in time, but just barely. So this little note here shows you a note that my girlfriend, my neighbor, left for Kevin on our mirror, telling him that she had taken me to the hospital. And so I realized how much those women depended on each other when their husbands were gone as well, because their husbands couldn't buzz down off a mountain and come to be there in time for their birth. Well, Kevin eventually was able to get a different job, and we were able to be together as a family. Now, there were, of course, the women that stayed behind, and many of them had very challenging circumstances. But there were also many women that went. If you go to the Mormon Battalion Association's website, you can see the names of all of the women and all of the children who went. I'm not going to give you a number because I would probably get it wrong. They are working very hard at the Mormon Battalion Association to make sure that the story that is told of the Mormon Battalion is accurate. They have found so many critical primary documents in the National Archives that are helping to clarify and to give a clearer picture of what really happened with the Mormon Battalion. And so I would just, I can't encourage you enough to join that Mormon Battalion Association and sit in on their meetings and learn about the things that they've done. They are truly changing the way the Mormon Battalion story is being shared because of all of the interesting information that they've come across. One of the things that you'll be able to see on that website is the name of Mary Agnes Brown. And for years, people would always say, even when I was hiking, well, we think there were 5 women that made it to San Diego, but here's the name of 4 of them, and we're not exactly sure who the 5th one is. People would throw out a name now and then, but there was never any conclusive evidence to know who that fifth woman was. Well, these people at the Mormon Battalion Association have been the super sleuths, and they have positively identified from records who the fifth woman was on the Mormon Battalion Trek all the way to California. Well, another reason I wanted to go was I wanted to go and be on a historic trail. You drive by the freeways and you see these little signs that say the Oregon Trail or things like that, the Mormon Trail, and you look out and there's this vast field and you say, okay, but where is it? I know that we're around it somewhere, but I didn't know. I wanted to go and stand in the ruts. I wanted to know I was on a trail. And that was one of the things I wanted to do, going with Kevin. And sure enough, I was able to recognize and appreciate and walk on and stand in wagon swells. And it's an incredible experience to know that you're actually there where they were. And so I'm really grateful for that experience as well. You know, these women had a lot of challenges getting down that trail. We can talk a little bit more about what I've learned from hearing other people and reading some books about what their experience was like. But the thing that I came to realize is they also had many blessings. They saw so many beautiful things and beautiful places as they hiked. And that was one of the things I came to appreciate as well. There was just always something beautiful to look at. And as they went down the trail, those beauties changed drastically, but there was still a lot of beauty. And I can share with you some of the experiences I had as I transitioned from green, lush Missouri and Kansas to Oklahoma, then New Mexico, and the deserts of California. Of course, one of the things that I most wanted to do with Kevin is I just knew he was going to meet a lot of really fun people and have a lot of stories to tell. And I did not want to miss out on that. And sure enough, this is just a smattering of the wonderful people that we met. We had scouts, we had rescuers, we had families that hiked with us, we had incredible women that hosted us, we had historians that gave campfire programs with us. We had women that hiked with me that just enriched my life by being there and sharing their stories. We had campground hosts, and we had just local people that knew ranchers and knew that we were not going to make it down that trail unless they had our help. And there's just very sweet stories with each one of these people and the many others that I couldn't even picture here. And so that's another reason that I wanted to go on the trail. So basically, I went because I didn't want to be left behind. I wanted to go, and I didn't have any children at home. I didn't have any responsibilities that I needed to stay home for. And so I went because I could.
When I came back from Fort Leavenworth in 2006 and had pretty well decided that I needed to hike the trail to really understand what I was talking about and what the men were talking about. So I was a little bit nervous about broaching this idea to Denny because it was going to be a long thing. It was going to be quite an investment. And so anyway, I finally sidled up to it and suggested that, I really think I need to go hike the trail and, do it the way they did it. So I was really shocked when she came back almost immediately. Within seconds, she said, well, you're not leaving me here. I'm going to go too. And that just completely floored me. I had no idea she would react that way, but was very happy that she did. And having Denny there along the trail brought a very different interactions than would have been the case had she not been there, if it was just me. She brought a touch of talking to people and making connections that, it's just not me. I was focused on hiking the trail and understanding the journals. But Denny saw a whole different set of connections and interactions with people that wouldn't have occurred to me and wouldn't have occurred had she not been there. So while I'm really paying attention to the journals, like coming into Las Vegas and San Miguel, the original battalions got close to 500 people with them and marching in with their guns. That's going to elicit one set of responses from the people. But when the sick group was trailing along, they show up with their wagons and their women in the wagons, and they come rolling up. The Mexican women came out and said, American women, American women. And the women start hugging each other, and they're talking to each other, trying to talk to each other. And you just get this sense that having the women there elicited a completely different response than the military guys would have. So there's a whole different set of contexts and subtexts and subcontexts of communications and interactions and expectations when the women are along, because the guys just don't get it. They're seeing it one way and the women see it a completely different way. And that's true today. I see things one way and Denny sees them very differently and sees opportunities there I'm just completely blind to. So it was wonderful having her along and contributing the ways that she did. So many of our long-term connections with people have come through Denny rather than myself. And that's a wonderful thing.
No, but I mean, it turned out wonderfully. You had a positive experience. You met so many wonderful people. And, I kind of wish I would have went with Paul for the couple of weeks that he was there. But, being in the middle of building a house and stuff, it was a little tough. So, and I didn't want to wear the costumes. Costumes are a big thing for me. So